Newly elected chairperson of the ANC in Gauteng, Panyaza Lesufi, says the 14th provincial elective conference will reconvene on the weekend of the 9th and 10th of July. It had to be called off due to delays in adopting credentials and the issue of quarantine votes from the Ekurhuleni Region, as well as an attempted court interdict. Lesufi says they had to close the conference due to some delegates having been fatigued. Lesufi and the rest of the newly elected leadership were addressing the media earlier at the ANC headquarters in Johannesburg.
It's important to note that the majority of the provincial officials are women. This is a first in our province and a major stride for women leadership, not only in our province, but in the country as well. This communicates a clear message that the ANC has a place for our women. It is important to note that the elected leaders came from different leadership preferences. The conference adopted a motion for our preparation for the National Policy Conference in July 2022, and the conference resolved to adjourn its work to reconvene in 2 weeks' time, that is on the 9th and 10th of July, to conclude the businesses of the provincial conference. This is very important. When we are about to start with the election of PC members and to receive reports on policy documents, it was quite clear that our delegates were fatigued and we needed to adjourn conference. So conference was adjourned, and now conference will continue on the 9th and 10th of July to conclude all its business. And when you say all of its business, it means going to commission, receiving commission reports, finalizing our policy position, and also finalizing the election of the provincial executive committee members.
Well, for more on this, let's cross now to my colleague Natasha Phiri, who's been covering this story for us extensively. Thanks very much, Natasha, for joining us. Tell us more.
Thank you so much, Nompu. So the biggest talking point now is that the ANC Gauteng province will conclude its business in 2 weeks' time, the weekend of the 9th and the 10th of July. And of course, commissions will then sit and we'll see the election of those 30 additional PC members. Remember, that couldn't happen this past weekend because of the many delays that this conference faced. And we saw the newly elected chairperson, Mr. Panyaza Lesufi, explaining some of the challenges that conference faced, that being of logistics as well, the court interdicts, the quarantine votes, which has been such a contentious issue, and of course the newly elected top 5 officials saying that this matter, of course, will be dealt with. But I'm actually joined by a person who's no stranger to the media, the MEC of Infrastructure. She's now the Deputy Provincial Secretary, and of course it's quite interesting to note that she is the youngest and a female on the top 5. You're joined by Ms. Tasneem Mutala. Thank you so much for joining us on SABC News. Of course, you really promised me an interview and you lived up to your province. Ms. Mutala, I mean, seeing the newly elected leadership of the ANC, I mean, we over the weekend, we heard the organizational reports, and it was quite glaring. It said that the ANC had actually lost trust with the people of Gauteng, and the people of Gauteng felt they need to punish the ANC. How will this leadership collective then ensure that they gain and they regain the trust of the people?
Thank you so much, and thanks for being patient with me and waiting for the interview. I think that the fact that the people in Gauteng and people in South Africa have lost trust in the ANC is not new. I think when we've looked at diagnosing some of the problems in the ANC and some of the reasons behind electoral decline over a long period of time, one of the reasons that we had identified was the lack of trust and the dwindling trust amongst our people, those who vote, those who are residents, those who don't vote, but are affected by the decisions of the ANC and of the ANC-led government. of course, when you identify a problem, the first route to fixing that problem is to take ownership of it and to accept the way you've gone wrong, and then begin to put in place processes and ways of correcting it. I think we would be in a worse position if we were in denial as the ANC. I think we would be in a worse position if we were scapegoating as the ANC. I think we would be in a worse position if we were trying to defer the problem and to transfer it to somebody else's doorstep, except we have not done that and have begun to accept our role and responsibility in the decline. What needs to happen now is corrective behavior going forward and corrective measures and corrective steps. I think this leadership collective, as far as just the office bearers are concerned that have been elected and confirmed, is that we need to commit to doing that. Correct, and I think the chairperson has spoken about it, correct what is wrong, and ourselves, just as individuals and as collective, to correct some of the things that we would have done wrong, accepting that, of course, they were wrong, and that if we want to see the ANC live for more than our own lifespans, that we need to do things correctly.
Now, conference was marred by some major challenges that, I've cited to earlier on. How will you ensure that when you reconvene in the next 2 weeks, it doesn't happen again?
Well, of course, the first things that we do need to do is to, like I say, acknowledge what went wrong. And in doing that, the chairperson apologized to everybody, guests and delegates alike, for the logistical challenges that we faced. We will be convening the steering committee. The newly elected PSO is now part of that steering committee. So we do need to sort of get a handover report and a report. Luckily enough, the provincial secretary was a member of the steering committee already in his capacity as the regional secretary. So it's not as if we're starting afresh, but we just need to be able to identify, isolate those problems around logistics and correct them. Better preparation and planning will result in a better outcome.
Another challenge that you faced was the issue of bogus delegates. Now, going to this conference, we were speaking of you've employed ANC members that attended the conference not to throw away their tags.
Yes, please. I think importantly is that we want to tighten the process, and we want to tighten and make sure whatever led to the delays is not repeated. We had announced to plenary, and of course we will be communicating formally to our structures, that all invited guests, whether you are a non-voting delegate, and even members of the media, to retain their accreditation and identification tags, because we will not be reissuing or making new ones, just so that we protect the integrity of the process going forward. And that will be your access to the venue, and of course those who need to vote will use those tags to be able to identify themselves as voting delegates.
Just one more question. I know I said lastly, but I mean, seeing the composition of the top 5, there are 3 women out of 2, which is quite exemplary. Would you like to see more women in leadership positions, especially within the ANC, and especially young people as well?
Well, of course, I don't want to downplay the fact that there's, for the first time in history of a structure at a PEC level across the length and breadth of the country, that there are 3 women in the top 5. And of course, the ANC has always championed the representation of fair representation of women in all structures, and it's actually a constitutional imperative that we have a minimum of 50% being female in all our structures. Of course, the form is one thing, but we need to be able to also speak to the content. Going forward, I think it's important that we continue to break glass barriers. The first, of course, the fact that we have 3 represented in the officials of the province. Going forward, we need not only the representation in terms of number, but in terms of which positions they occupy, because it has to be more strategic than it has been in the past, and that's what we're going to fight for. That's what we're going to push for going ahead.
Okay, Ms. Matara, thank you so much. Of course, we'll catch up with you in the next 2 weeks. Of course, that was Ms. Tasneem Mutara, the Deputy Provincial Secretary of the ANC, who's a newly elected official of the ANC in the province. And of course, Nompu, that much important announcement that she just made, she's employed, I beg your pardon, those ANC members and those ANC delegates, the over 1,000 ANC delegates that attended conference, to bring their their tags and not to lose them, to also avoid the crisis that we saw of the bogus delegates this past weekend. Of course, just an important announcement, if you've just tuned in, the conference of the ANC in Gauteng will reconvene on the 9th and on the 10th of July, which is in 2 weeks' time, to actually finish the business of conference, that being the issue of commissions, and that being, of course, the other issue of the election of those 30 additional PEC members. With that said, Nomput's back to you in studio.